Previously, we learned the equation of an ellipse whose center is either at the origin or translated to a different point on the plane. Now we are going to study the equation of a hyperbola. What is a hyperbola? It is the set of points whose difference of the distances from two fixed point, foci, is constant. What is the equation of a hyperbola at the origin? The equation of the hyperbola is x squared over half the transverse axis squared minus y squared over half the conjugate axis squared equals 1. The transverse axis is the distance between the two vertices and conjugate axis is the distance between the co-vertices. A hyperbola whose center is the origin has its vertices a steps away from the origin on the x-axis, and its co-vertices are b steps away on the y-axis. The foci are c steps away from the origin on the x-axis and c can be calculated from this equation. A hyperbola could be either horizontal or vertical. The horizontal hyperbola has the x term first, but the vertical hyperbola has the y term first. In both cases the denominator of the first term is half the major axis, and the denominator of the second term is half the transverse axis. The vertices are a steps away from the origin on the y-axis. The co-vertices are b steps away from the origin on the x-axis. The foci exist on the transverse axis which is now the y-axis and are c away from the origin. Where c squared is equal to the sum of the two denominators of each equation a squared plus b squared. For example, what is the equation of this hyperbola? To determine the equation of the hyperbola first we decide whether it is vertical or horizontal one. The given graph is a horizontal hyperbola as it opens to the left and to the right. So, its equation starts with the x squared term. The first denominator is half the major axis squared which is 1 squared. What is the second denominator? The second denominator is half the minor axis squared which is 2 squared. So, the equation of the hyperbola is x squared over 1 minus y squared over 4 is equal to 1. What is the location of the focus point? The focus point exists on the x-axis so its y-coordinate is 0 and its x-coordinate is equal to positive and negative the square root of the sum of the two denominators which can be simplified to be root 5. Another example, what is the equation of this hyperbola? To determine the equation of the hyperbola first we decide whether it is vertical or horizontal one. The given graph is a vertical hyperbola as it opens up and down. So, its equation starts with the y squared term. What is the first denominator? The first denominator is half the major axis squared which is 3 squared. What is the second denominator? To find the second denominator, we need to graph the asymptotes to determine the conjugate axis like this. The second denominator is half the conjugate axis squared which is 1 squared. The equation of the hyperbola is y squared over 9 minus x squared over 1 is 1. What is the location of the focus point? The focus point exists on the y-axis so its x-coordinate is 0 and its y-coordinate is equal to positive and negative the square root of the sum of the two denominators which can be simplified to be positive and negative root 10. To sum up, hyperbola could be horizontal or vertical. If its equation starts with the x squared term, then it is horizontal, but if its equation starts with the y squared term, then it is vertical. In both cases, the vertices comes from the first denominator and the co-vertices comes from the second denominator.